Good afternoon. This is Kathleen Smith, Chief Operating Officer here at ClearedJobs.Net, and I am joined today by one of my dear friends in the community, Peter Brooks from Northrop Grumman. Peter, you and I have not seen each other since 2019 when we were on the leadership panel for Recruit. So a lot has changed in years. Can you tell us a little bit about your role at Northrop Grumman so that we can bring everyone up to speed as to why I've invited you here today?
Yeah, absolutely. And first of all, thank you for having me. Thanks to all the recruiters that have joined today. I know how busy everyone is, so your time is very precious, very valuable. I hope you take something away meaningful from this conversation. So I'm the Vice President of Talent Acquisition for Northrop Grumman. So all of TA is under my purview. We have 4 businesses and then a corporate center. So all the recruiters kind of sit out in those sectors and in corporate, but we're kind of collectively a TA organization powerhouse. So
You're definitely a powerhouse. We've enjoyed working with you for almost 2 decades here. So one of the reasons why we really wanted to have this conversation is that businesses worldwide have been shooken up over the last year. And we really wanted to focus specifically not only on recruiting, but recruiting and government contracting, because our recruiting in government contracting is very different from recruiting in the world in general. But we also wanted to talk about from a leadership standpoint. I mean, we know that recruiters really are the face of a company interfacing with the candidates, but how you as a leader have kept people going, making sure business keeps going, because as we know, all of the work that supports the mission continued during the pandemic. It couldn't stop. So we really needed to make sure that we take a moment here to assess sort of what are some of the lessons that we've learned. So the first was, can you sort of explain what it was like in March 2020 when you had to pivot and deploy new recruiting strategies? And how did you assess goals and milestones to know that you were moving toward your goals and success that you are needed to tell your customers?
yeah, so that was a great kind of segue into the conversation. Look, this last year has been unlike any year, at least in my lifetime, and certainly in my professional experience. Northrop Grumman, the thing I think that made the pivot easy for us, not that there weren't challenges, but I think what made it easy for us is that we have a very clear North Star. I mean, our employees are by far our number one resource. Our people are our business. And whether those are candidates coming into the process or that's our existing employee base, it's all vitally important to us. And so we oriented around what was going to be most conducive for their health, for their well-being, and to continue this journey that we've been on in terms of creating the most diverse and inclusive workforce that we possibly can. So, when we got to March of last year, it became very evident very quickly that we were going to have to pivot to a new reality. In February, I actually kicked off a leadership conference for one of our businesses, and I stood on a stage in front of 800 leaders and talked to them about our event strategy, which was all predicated on in-person events and meeting and greeting candidates. And we had to quickly align that to a virtual engagement. Fortunately, we had some tools already in service. We brought some other tools quickly online. Once we did that, the metrics, the goals, the outcomes, those didn't really change for us. We didn't create anything new in terms of how we were looking at recruiting productivity. Really, the emphasis for me was really more on how are we supporting our teams? How are we supporting our candidates through the process? Look, there are a lot of advantages to going virtual. People did not burn a lot of daylight going through the commute around the Beltway or to whatever location they were in. They could focus on their job. Productivity was not a problem. But look, recruiters tend to be very social people. They tend to like the interaction. And so for me, it was really more about how do we ensure that while we're leveraging the technology to make sure that we're continuing our business, sustaining our business, growing our business, that people feel equipped, that they're not burning out, that they're feeling like they've got support, that there's an open door for them if they've got challenges. That to me was the more critical element. And frankly, it's the one that I think we're going to have to continue to focus on. I think there are a lot of people who feel that, look, the pandemic's kind of winding down. A lot of people are vaccinated, and that there's certainly some relief that comes with that, for myself included. I'm a middle-aged person. I'm not a high-risk person, but I really wanted to keep myself safe. So to some extent, there's some relief in sight. However, I actually think in some ways this year is going to be more challenging than last year, because when you didn't have an option, you're either going to go virtual or you're not going to be in existence. Then you can quickly kind of move that direction. Now, the question is going to be, what balance do we want? How often do we want to be in the office? What's the right mixture of in-person recruiting events versus virtual recruiting events? And there are myriad stakeholders to accommodate in that process: our hiring managers, the candidates, our own teams. So I think, that level of compassion that hopefully people were bringing to the table, supporting their organizations through this past year, hopefully will continue to amplify this year, because I think in some respects this year is going to present some different challenges.
Yeah, that's a really good point. And I think with our next question, where we're just going to, dovetail right into the next question, because I think really you as a leader, and I know me as a leader, not only with the volunteer organizations that I'm part of, but also with my own recruiting team, we have this 10,000 foot view of what are the challenges that are happening, because we're used to seeing our teams together. We're used to seeing them in an office. We're able to sense the vibe and the energy. But you sort of touched on what are some of the challenges that your recruiting teams faced that were new due to the pandemic, and what did you sort of do to overcome these as a team and as a leader?
Yeah, that is a really good point. I mean, again, I think it's just paramount critical to have a North Star with how you're going to show up to support your teams. And for me, Northrop has always had a very clear position that every person in our company that we're recruiting, in the communities that we live in, has the right to be treated with fairness, with dignity, with respect, and with fairness, equity. And so if you're oriented around that, everything else can kind of flow naturally. So our recruiters, they did a fantastic job last year. Last year, we hired more people into our company than we have in the history of our company. So while we're facing all of these challenges, social justice issues, the pandemic, a very tight labor market, we were able to execute at an extraordinarily high level. It comes with some challenges. And so for me, the primary one was around stress, whether that was people worried about their own health or the health of their families, their kids, being home from school or not being able to go to college, or those kinds of things, huge impact. And, I think for women in our society, they oftentimes bear a heavier burden that way. It's not exactly fair, but it's the way that it's transpired in society. And for different parts of our population, I think you have to be equipped to really extend an extra hand, an extra bit of support, just to make sure that they've got everything that they need to do to bring their best self into the office and to their job. For recruiters, as you mentioned, a lot of times we like to do that in person. One of the favorite parts of my job is going out to different locations, learning more about our business, getting to meet our recruiters. That is a natural way to spend time with your team and understand what challenges they're facing, how you can equip them better to face those challenges. Being remote, you don't have that opportunity. So, one of the first things I did is just set up lunches across our organization. We have a large recruiting team, and I just started pulling, 5, 6 people together to have very candid, hopefully intimate one-on-ones or one-on-sixes with them to understand, like, what is it that you're facing? How can we help? What other resources do you need? And also to remind people it's okay to take a break. One of the problems with Zoom is that you can back those calls end to end across a day, work, voraciously, and wind up the day without having taken any time to take care of yourself or your family. So I think it's really essential as a leader, not only to equip your teams to face those challenges in a healthy way, but also to remind them and also to model it. Sometimes folks need reminders, especially recruiters. We tend to be a type A bunch. We tend to be, we see the hill, we take the hill. And so, look, it is a marathon, and we need to make sure that we're taking care of ourselves mentally, physically, and I think that's the essential part.
Yes, I know, since most of my colleagues, friends, customers are all recruiters. Yes, we all want to take the hill. I can definitely see that many of us were on Zoom from 7 in the morning until late at night, and time zones all of a sudden were no longer a big barrier. We tended to have conversations, and then all of our social time and our time with our families all became virtual, which had an entirely different stress on us. I had to impose sort of no more than 2 a day because, one, I didn't get any work done, but 2, it just is such a stress. Now let's talk a little bit more about you as a leader and some of the challenges you faced, because it's great to be part of the team. And one of the things that I really saw come clear over the last year is that leaders really had to take care of themselves, be the leader to their team in taking care of themselves, but also really leverage all of their resources. I think those who were natural leaders over the last year became much better leaders. I can definitely say this last year, I became a better leader. So what were some of the things that went on inside of Peter's head as far as the challenges you were facing, and what did you do? What was your process to overcome these challenges?
That's a great question. And look, I am a firm believer in leadership at every level. I don't believe that there are leaders and then just followers. I think that at least my expectation with my team is that we demonstrate leadership at every level. So we all are faced with that challenge. And I was alluding to it a minute ago. I think the big challenge for me is not having that in-person interaction, really making sure that my ear is tuned to what my people need, what our organization needs, what our candidates need. And so, as I mentioned, one of the things I did really quickly was start pulling together just small groups so people could have an easy and open channel to let me know, like, what are you seeing? What are you sensing? What are the challenges that you're facing? I think, on top of the whole pandemic issue and being remote, we also were dealing with social justice issues last year. We continue to deal with them. We've seen attacks on Asian Americans explode exponentially this year, and now we're seeing the same thing in the Jewish community. It's heartbreaking. And so I think one of the keys for me, being remote, having to deal with issues that society is grappling with, within my own organization, as we're interfacing with the communities that we live in. The key is making sure that you're really well connected. And so, we have 14 employee resource groups across Northrop Grumman dealing with different affinity groups, veterans, et cetera. we've built stronger partnerships with those organizations this year. We've always had great ERGs, and this year gave us an opportunity to strengthen those relationships, even stronger. I think that was one critical element for me. The other, again, is really being mindful, not just of your team, but of yourself. And are you taking care of yourself? Are you eating well? Are you getting enough sleep? Back in November and December, when the numbers were exploding and people were really hunkered down, I'm not going to lie, I probably indulged a little bit too much in comfort food. And I went into this year saying, you know what, I've got to practice what I preach here. So I've gotten really re-energized, redisciplined around, keeping myself healthy, working out, and being able to bring my whole and best self to work. I know that sounds a little cliche, but it is true. So hopefully that's helpful.
No, I didn't mean to cut you off. I really think that is those lessons of taking care of ourselves, I think really came to the forefront over this last year. We really, yes, so many people got sick, but at the same time, people really were able to focus on their health and how that becomes so much more pervasive throughout you as a leader, but you as a member of a team. If you're healthy and you can inspire and support others to be healthy. So, this really dovetails nicely into my next question, which I think I really think of this last year as one of a lot of silver linings. I know that, as you've pointed out, we've had social justice issues, we've had, weaknesses within our society that have been highlighted. We've had political issues, we've had distrust, we've had so many things that could weigh everyone down. At the same time, you've just pointed out taking care of yourself, being a better leader, pulling on your resources. So let's sort of, dive deeper a little bit into what are the silver linings you were seeing coming out of virtual recruiting, virtual hiring, and onboarding, and which of these pandemic changes do you believe are here to stay within your company and within our industry?
Yeah, that's also a really good question. I think that, look, we've known in recruiting for a long time that if you have a Wi-Fi connection and a cell phone, you can pretty much recruit anyone for anywhere. And so we've known that in our industry. I think there's always been a little bit more of a emphasis on in-person work, and some of that makes sense, especially for those of us who have a lot of skiff work and people that have to be in the office, manufacturing work, and people that have to be on the line, and being supportive of them, being there to intake and conduct strategy sessions with your hiring teams. But I think there was a new license to explore new ways of recruiting, of conducting recruiting events, the I-9 verifications going virtual. All of those things were very positive. And I think, look, our brand is built around defining possible. I wholeheartedly believe that. And I think we're going to have to continue to define what that means. In the literature today, I see a lot of people taking points of view that, in my view, over-index one way or the other. You have some tech companies who are like, we're never going back to an office. We're going to be 100% virtual. We have some organizations that are saying, you know what, we're going to forget everything we learned and we're going to go back to the way things used to be. I think balance is the key thing. There are opportunities for us to reconstellate around a new way of working, a new way of relating to each other here that I think are essential. And sometimes those are in person, and that's the best conduit for those interactions. Other times, remote and virtual is much easier, more cost effective. It opens the aperture for new pools of talent that you may not have tapped into historically. And the key is going to be maintaining discipline, encouraging people to think forward, think creatively about what is the right balance, And when does it make sense to do things, kind of old school, and when does it make sense to leverage all the technology we have available to tap into resources that otherwise would go untapped.
So is there one or two things in particular you think are definitely here to stay?
So if you push me to answer that question very discreetly, look, I think I'll give you a perfect example. I think that college recruiting will change. And not just because of our preferences, but also because of the preferences of college students. College students for several years now have told us, I'm in the middle of classes, I have exams, I've got a, social calendar here, and you're asking me to get on a plane, fly across the country, conduct, a 2-hour interview and fly home. That doesn't make sense to me. Can we do a video call? And I think a lot of places resisted that because it wasn't how they were accustomed to recruiting people. Now I think we have an opportunity to say, well, when does it make sense to be on campus? And when does it make sense to reach out individually to people and schedule video calls with them that are conducive to their calendars, their schedules, and the way, frankly, they want to interface with companies like ours? I think that's a reasonable conversation to have. And I think, if you push me on it, do I think it's going to go 100% virtual? I don't think so. But I think there will be a more hybridized version of how we go to campus. And I think that'll extend into other areas as well. And again, the key is going to be really having discipline around when in-person contact is really the most important, and when you can do things more efficiently and more cost effectively virtually.
I would never push you, David. Peter, I would never push you. I'm remembering that our audience of recruiters is not only made up of recruiters from, your wonderful team, which, I just want to say hi to that entire team that's been saying, liking and posting the post on LinkedIn, because you do have a phenomenal team. I've worked with so many of them over the years. But we're also trying to provide some inspiration to recruiters who may not have your kind of leadership in their company. We're trying to make sure that the whole community can learn from, what you've experienced and what you are driving your team to do. So I'm going to delve a little bit deeper into that. Oh, go ahead. Go back. What were you going to say?
So I was just going to say thank you for bringing that context to the table. And I think that goes back to something I said earlier, which is, for my team, I expect leadership at every level. And so what I would encourage the recruiters on this call, look, I've worked for incredibly enlightened leaders. I've worked for some leaders that, maybe weren't quite so enlightened. And they all, look, everyone brings their challenges to work. They do. But what I would encourage the recruiters here to do is look, you are a leader too, and you may not have a title. You may not, have the 20 years of experience. You may be relatively new, but there's value in your opinion. Your opinion is just as important as anyone else's. And especially if you're in the front lines, working with a hiring manager, working with a candidate, there's actually nobody better to ask, what do you think? How would you suggest that we proceed here? And so if you're in an organization where you're not seeing that level of support, ultimately at some point you might have to maybe find a different organization. But before you go that route, I would suggest, look, you've got a point of view, back it up with some data, back it up with some of your firsthand experience with hiring managers, with candidates, present that business case to your leaders. You can move the dial too. And so I would encourage folks here to use their voice.
That's a really great advice. And one of the things that I have really appreciated over this last let's just say 14 months is that because we didn't have the stress of commuting, we didn't have stress of, social engagements. I, like you, was able to really focus on my health because I wasn't flying to conferences 3 or 4 times a month. And I really had several personal and professional epiphanies. I sort of said, wow, I really can be healthy and traveling 3 or 4 times a month, even though I thought it was something that I really needed to do for my profession, that it wasn't really good for me personally and for my family. And so, as you said, this next year is going to be the hardest. I'm actually calling this summer the summer of confusion, as we deal with lifting mandates and company changes and what's going on, and everyone just going on vacation. So what were
Right.
what are the aha discoveries that you made, one maybe personally and one maybe professionally, that really just sort of surprised you about you and our industry?
So I'll try to marry the personal and professional into one. So I when I was younger, I used to ski a little bit, downhill ski, and then I didn't for a very long time. And over the course of the winter, it was one of those few things you could do outdoors in a fairly safe way. So I decided to go skiing again. And a friend that I was with talked me into trying to start off a Black Diamond Hill, which in retrospect might not have been the best way to kind of warm up, but um, but it was interesting. I'm standing on top of the hill and I'm looking down, and it's a breathtaking view and a little gut churning. And my friend said, "Listen, Peter, just remember the key is when you ski down this hill, you actually have to kind of lean into it. You have to lean forward. It feels counterintuitive because that's downhill. But if you lean back, if you try to hold back, you're actually putting your body at a very bad angle, and it's going to actually be more dangerous." And I took his advice. I made it down the hill. Obviously, I'm talking to you. So it all worked out. But I feel the same thing is true for the challenges that we faced last year, that we're going to continue to face this year, new challenges this year, I'm sure. Lean in is the most important thing. If you hold back, if you're trepidatious, if you don't trust yourself and your instincts and your own experience, you will inadvertently create, a worse situation. So regardless of how scary the future may look or a particular circumstance, like everybody going home out of the blue, or like the George Floyd situation, or what's currently happening in some of our communities, the important thing to do is to lean forward, because if you lean backward, you're going to create more danger, I think, for yourself and for your teams. So lean into it. Yeah, that's what I would say.
Peter, I had another point, but you covered it earlier. I think that is a really, really great place for us to stop today's discussion, because I really like that. Leaning into the challenge, not backing away, taking your best foot forward, and believing in your team, because they're all leaders along with you. Do you have any other final words for our audience?
No, I would just say, thank you again. I know your time's valuable, and Kathleen, for you too, and your team there. Remember to continue to treat each other with some compassion. It goes a long way. And for all the Type A recruiters on the phone, that includes extending that compassion to your own self, because sometimes we're our own harshest critic. So, be gentle with yourself and lean into the hill.
Sounds great. Peter, thank you so much for your time today. Thank you to everyone in our audience. And I really appreciate that as a community, we've really come together to make sure that we continue supporting the mission and that we continue getting great talent in to support that mission. Thank you again, Peter. Thank you, everyone. Have a great day.